I know you guys are still reeling after that crazy Mike Tyson Jake Paul fight, but there's a lot of other things happening right now in the country, and that is men's basketball. It is starting out to be a
Correction,
phenomenal season.
Mike Tyson fight.
Sorry, the Mike
Mike.
Tyson fight. And it we got college basketball. We had a new college football playoff ranking came out earlier this week. And also we have some primetime college football matchups, and we also have some matchups that can be potential spoilers. I'm your host, Matthew Raridan, and this is Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights. And I'll tell you what, for sports, this is an incredible weekend. I know baseball is over with, but we've got college basketball happening, college football, NFL football, NHL hockey. We've got, like I said, the boxing matchup that took place on Friday and the UFC event that's taking place tonight. There's just a whole lot to really be happening in one weekend. And just like always, I'm always here for it. I can never have enough. It's ice in my veins. I love it. And please, please, please just give me more of it. I'm your host, Matthew Raridan, and with me today is none other than David Street.
Hey guys.
And also, we've got Ed Smith.
Welcome, y'all.
Well, before we get into this great, once again, college football weekend and the college football playoff rankings, a quick update on men's basketball. I know that it's early, but you're starting to see some of the teams that came in on the early preseason polls, how they're doing. And typical enough, Kansas is doing great right now. They're at a top 3-0. I know these are power rankings per ESPN because the AP poll will come out here in 1 day time, but Kansas has looked impressive. They had a great win over Michigan State, 77-69, that took place earlier this week, followed up by number 2 Auburn. Auburn moving up 8 spots, being 3-0, and they had a great win over Houston. I mean, that was an upset because, as we talked about, there was a lot of drama that took place on an airplane flight, and well, they didn't let that distract them as they are now 3-0, followed by Gonzaga, which is 2-0, Bama 3-0. Interesting enough, they're 3-0, yet they moved down in spots, but you know how these things go. It's still early, and at the end of the day, sometimes these rankings may not matter. Behind Alabama, we got UConn at 3-0, then Iowa State at 2-0. And here's where it's interesting. Houston at 2-1, even though they did lose to Auburn, they are still there in the top 10, followed by Kentucky, which is 3-0. Remember, guys, this is the first year since Coach Cal left. Kentucky's 3-0, picked up a massive win over Duke, 77-72 at the Champions Classic. Uh, that has to feel good in Lexington. I know it's early in the year, but to start out 3-0 after losing Coach Cal, morale seems to be fine there. At least right now it is. Finishing to the top 12, Arizona at 2-0, Tennessee, Duke, and then North Carolina. As you can tell, those are pretty much every name in there is all big college basketball schools. It just seems to always be there. Not really much surprises at all. And we talked about it last year going into the college March Madness tournament. The SEC, once again, seems to be doing pretty well so far in the rankings. And it seems like they're going to continue to do that, Ed. I know you've been paying attention to it, and same with last year. The SEC seems to be dominating all around in a lot of different sports.
Yeah, and it's funny to me how the Big 12 kind of punted on being a football conference
Yeah.
uh, to more focus on being a basketball conference. Well, yes, they have three of the top teams in this power ranking here, but it's not everything. It's not. I, I'm sorry. 4 teams because you have to add Arizona now to being part of the Big 12. Uh, but once you get out of that top cluster of teams in the Big 12, it you also wind up seeing Baylor and you see some of these uh, very good teams, but not the upper echelon teams. SEC has been taking this NIL collective that they get from football and pouring it into their basketball programs too. And it is paying dividends across the board. For Auburn, it is certainly paying dividends faster than it is for their football team. So there is that portion of it. As far as Kentucky, they put together a roster when there was nobody after Coach Cal left. They hired uh, their the legacy coach. I forget his name off the top of my head,
Mark
but
Pope. Mark.
Pope, yes. Uh, they hired him. He had 0 places on that roster. He put together a roster that came together and was very resilient. It's very easy for a team that was kind of just hamstrung together to go out into a stage like the Champions Classic and just basically not look like they're a cohesive team. That team was together, they were fighting, and they really just wore out Duke down the stretch when Duke started to get some of those injuries pile up.
Well, and don't forget that Mark Pope did play for Kentucky. He is a Kentucky alum, and of course, being a head coach at a school that you played for doesn't automatically guarantee you success. But I do feel like that if you're the coach at your alma mater, there you do sort of have like a sense of responsibility because you're coaching at your school. Your need to want to do great is even bigger than what it may have been before.
Yeah, there's nothing like a legacy hire because I feel like to them and to the university, it just means more. It really does. And great for Mark Pope to get that job. You know, you are filling some shoes, but uh, you could already see with how Kentucky's playing that it means more, just like I said. And Ed, on the other hand, on Duke, they are dealing with, and you probably saw it on the headlines with all these cramps right now, and they're trying to figure out what's really going on, why their players are cramping. Because, I mean, Duke's a powerhouse. They probably have top of the line everything there, so you would think that their players would be pretty well hydrated, but anything could still happen, and they are just dealing with that.
The other,
Yeah, and when it comes to Duke, the biggest thing that I think the country saw with Duke is Cooper Flag is the real deal.
Mhm.
He truly is, and he is he is going to be a wooden finalist in his first year, which that doesn't happen very often. That's somebody to certainly keep an eye out for. But also, he does have some supporting cast. They've just got to come together and uh, really, really get over the hump to get back into this top 10.
The other thing too about Mark Pope in Kentucky, and if I recall correctly, I think I actually made this point when all the Kentucky fans were freaking out about hiring him after they lost to Calipari to Arkansas. If I recall correctly, I think at the time I said that this could actually end up being a blessing in disguise for Kentucky to help them focus more on the transfer portal and focus more on veteran players because under John Calipari it was really all about the one and done and just more individual talent than rather the team aspect. Now, to be completely fair, even though things started like that under Calipari and they were like that for most of his time in Kentucky, I want to say that toward the end of his time at Kentucky, he did kind of drift away from the one and done, and he focused more on veteran team basketball for Kentucky. But either way, his overall legacy, still stood. We all knew what he was about for the most part at Kentucky, and yeah, like I said at the time, this really at that time it felt like a blessing in disguise for Kentucky, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, and it's still very well. Maybe it's obviously too early to tell. It's could take some time for sure. Um, but on to from one sport to another, college football playoff rankings came out. There were some surprises there. We knew with Miami going down, Georgia going down, there was going to be some changes near the top, and that's exactly what we saw. Number 1 and 2, and you could argue 3 was pretty obvious, typical. Oregon at 1, Ohio State at 2, and Texas at 3. Penn State came in at the 4th spot, followed by Indiana at 5, and that's big. What Signetti's doing there in Indiana is tremendous, and just really big props to him in that program. And then BYU at 6, just 5 and 6. Looking at that alone, honestly, is like wow. It doesn't get any better than that in the sense of we're seeing different teams here now, and I love it. I really do. I know BYU. There's a lot of arguments there, and we may talk about that, but they are undefeated. Tennessee at 7, followed by Notre Dame, Miami, and Alabama to round out the top 10. But this is where things get way more interesting because Ole Miss is at 11, which they moved up spots after that Georgia onslaught. Speaking of Georgia, they're at 12. And yes, the number 12 is synonymous because it is the college football playoff. There's 12 seeds now. Although Georgia's at 12, they don't make it right now because at number 13 is Boise State, 14 SMU, and at 15 A&M. With the new rankings, the new rules, Boise State would then go in at the 12th spot because actually they'd be at the 5th spot because they are would be the highest ranked group of 5 winner if it stays right now. So who's pissed off about that, David? Georgia fans are pissed off, and I love to hear your input on that, being a Florida Gator fan and all. They feel like they're being disrespected because of strength of schedule, however you want to put it. But the fact that their team could be missing the playoffs right now, they don't like this.
Well, then don't lose 2 games, dumbasses.
Play better.
There's really nothing more to it than that.
Yeah, it is. They are not playing good football right now, and you could argue several of their wins were very, very close because Carson Beck did not look good. They did not look good against Florida until the last 2 minutes, pretty much.
Yeah, it was,
Yeah.
we kept it within single digits for most of the game, and then Georgia's talent just took over when it mattered the most. But yeah, your overall point stands. This Georgia team has not looked that great at all for Georgia standards.
Ed, with just the top 15 I gave, what surprises do you see? What surprises you the most?
Well, what surprised me the most is we finally got an answer from the playoff committee that no, the final spot of Group of 5 does not have to be in the top 12 for that to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
So they gave at least a smidgen of clarity with that. What I also see is the quality of loss means something for all the. There's really only 3 teams that are undefeated here in this group, and so that's 12. That's 12 with a loss, at least one, and that quality of loss means something. Whereas the quality of win, they're all beating each other up. Most of these teams are within the top 15 of strength of schedule so far this year, and they're just beating each other up. There is a bit of attrition going on. And to have one team lose to somebody that's in this playoff ranking versus a team that has lost to somebody that isn't within 30 spots of this playoff ranking means something to the seeding of who goes where.
Unless you're Notre Dame. You could lose to NIU and still be the 8th seed. But, well, speaking of Notre Dame, that's another point there because we thought maybe they could steal a spot from Boise State. That's not the case. So as of right now, Boise State would be that group of 5 winner that would make that automatic bid. So,
Well,
yeah.
Well, to be fair to Notre Dame, I mean, yeah, that NIU loss is bad, but Notre Dame also has a big win over Texas A&M. At the
Yeah.
time, I don't think we foresaw just how big that win over Texas A&M was going to be. So
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree, and I shouldn't have overlooked that too because A&M has turned out to be a solid team as they are here at 15. So they've played great football. They've lost some that they should have won, but that's how it is. There are several teams on here that lost when they probably should have won. So yeah, Oregon being undefeated, Indiana undefeated, BYU undefeated. And the rest have all lost a game or two. Georgia being one of the teams that have lost two for sure. So it's we're starting to see some clarity to how the committee is running things. But Ed, with you being the resident Longhorn fan, you fully support Longhorns at the 3 spot.
I do fully support the Longhorns at the 3 spot. Yes, they have a loss. That loss was to Georgia. Yes, Penn State right behind us. They had the loss to Ohio State. So it's kind of a wash there. But as the eye test means something to the committee, and Texas does look like a more complete team than what Penn State does because Texas is, shall I say, better than average everywhere on the field. Whereas Penn State, they are still rather average at coaching because James Franklin somehow packs it in during big games and can't seem to get out of his own way trying to not lose in the first half of a game in which you're leading. It makes no sense. I've seen many pundits and prognosticators and sports analysts and all this stuff complain that Texas is at number 3 ahead of the undefeated Indiana and BYU. Well, BYU has predictively the 24th worst, is 24th in strength of schedule. So they should, if they're really that good, they should be undefeated. They are not playing teams that are in the top 10. They only have 2 games against teams that were in the 11 to 25 range of rankings, and they won those. If they're a top 10 team like they're listed, they should win those. There's no debate about that. Indiana, they have yet to play a top 10 team. They have only 1 game against somebody ranked in the top 40. So to have Texas and Penn State ahead of them, I have zero issue with that. What I do have an issue with is this somehow belief that Texas should be below Tennessee and Alabama and Georgia and Ole Miss because their one loss was at home to Georgia. Well, guess what? Georgia lost 2 games. Alabama lost 2 games. Ole Miss has lost 2 games. So tell me where that argument lies. Tennessee's loss was against Arkansas rather than Georgia. I think we can all agree there's a wide gap between losses between one versus the other.
Mhm.
And that to me puts Texas at number 3 above these other SEC schools. I don't care what you're telling me as far as the standings. This is a CFP. This is a subjective thing, and the subjectiveness comes with an eye test. And Texas does look like the 3rd best team in the country.
well, it's the interesting thing about that, Ed. I mean, I agree with pretty much everything that you said. I feel like the problem for when we do the when these kind of things happen when we're talking about these rankings is that people, whether intentionally or not, it's like people forget that there's football teams beyond the top 25, right? So what I'm trying to say is, so the people who are pissed at Texas being 3 and they argue for BYU and Indiana being over Texas, right? So the people arguing in favor of BYU or in Indiana, right? The detractors will say, well, BYU and Indiana don't have any top 25 wins, right? Whereas then you could say, then you could say, well, Texas has one loss, and well, Texas doesn't have any top 25 wins either, right? So like the people who are arguing against Texas and the people who are arguing for BYU and Indiana will point out that while neither of those schools might not have any top 25 wins per se, they're still undefeated, whereas Texas has one loss and doesn't have any top 25 wins. That took a lot longer for me to get there than I would have liked, right? But of course the problem with that is that it goes back to what I said before, that people just conveniently forget that there are football teams beyond the top 25, right? So it's like teams outside the top 25 don't even exist to these people anymore. So sure, Texas may have a loss and they might not have any top 25 wins, right? But it's like, well, and I don't know the ranked teams that they've beaten, but it's like, okay, well, they still beat the number 30 team or they still beat the number 29 team. And at the end of the day, they still have beaten a tougher schedule than the other teams have. So if that makes any sense, that took way longer than I anticipated. But
Sure, and I get where you're going with that. Just as a response, one, the SEC made the conference schedule for Texas. Texas did not choose this schedule.
fair
So
enough.
Texas playing the schedule that is in front of them is what they have to play. Two, Texas tried to schedule tougher competition in non-conference, and it's not Texas's fault that those teams wound up not being the best teams or as good as they were the previous 3 to 4 years. UTSA has been in the championship game for the AAC 2 of the last 3 years. They're not as good this year. Michigan won the national championship last year. They're not as good this year, but we scheduled them to have these marquee matchups, these marquee games, this tougher competition, getting us into the SEC. Hell, next year we play Ohio State. We are trying to schedule tougher competition, but it's not our fault that these teams are not as good as what were advertised, like Oklahoma, like Georgia was tough as advertised, but part of that was our quarterback, Quinn Ewers, coming off of an injury, had poor mechanics, had tough time reading the defenses because he did not play the week before against live competition. So that first half screwed everything, and Georgia wound up getting 3 touchdowns on drives of less than 30 yards. I'm sorry. If your team gets 3 touchdowns on drives of less than 30 yards, you are obviously going to look like you dominated that game. It wasn't a complete domination, like physically whip them up and down the field. They had a couple of fumbles, they had an interception. These things happen.
You're talking
But,
you're talking about Georgia, right?
right.
And if I
Uh,
recall,
so,
and
so for people to say that Texas is a sorry program, a sorry team this year that should be fifth in the SEC because Georgia beat them at home off of mainly three touchdown drives under 30 yards. I don't see that argument holding water. That's just people trying to bring down Texas because they want another team to be ahead of them.
also, hey, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Carson Beck have, I think, 0 touchdowns, two, maybe 3 interceptions in that game? I
Yeah,
seem to recall him not having a great game, like pretty much all season for him.
right. His touchdown to interception ratio right now, I think, is 17-12.
Yeah.
It's not the best, especially when you're playing the SEC and playing for Georgia. But
Some people
uh,
thought Carson Beck was going to be the number one pick. Just some people that I know.
yeah, that's changed a little bit, probably, most likely. But let's go ahead and preview some games this week because there's some games that could be upsets. There are some games that, are primetime matchups. And let's start with the first one here. That is the number one Oregon Ducks going into Madison to face off against the Wisconsin Badgers. These two teams have had some great matchups in the Rose Bowl. Me being a Duck fan, I could tell you, the Rose Bowl in the 2019-2020 season was one of the best matchups I've ever seen, led by Justin Herbert for the Ducks and Jonathan Taylor for the Badgers. And then just a couple years before that, Oregon and Wisconsin again in the Rose Bowl, where Kenyon Barner and D'Anthony Thomas ran for over 350 yards. It was just a fun game as we escaped that as well. But guys, I've had this game circled before the season even started. Didn't know how Oregon was going to do. I had high hopes for them, and I still do. But this game, you could call it a trap game because Wisconsin isn't the same Wisconsin team that they were, just years prior. They have struggled. They've dealt with injuries. They have a 5-4 record right now. Oregon being undefeated. It is just kind of rolling right into that trap game of Oregon's got one game after this, and that's at Washington, which we have had trouble the last 2 years to beat. We are 0-3 against Washington the last 2 years. So they can't be looking forward ahead that much. They need to be focusing on now against Wisconsin. And if they could do that, Oregon's got all the tools necessary to beat this team. It just worries me, and I'm going to get roasted for this, guys, from any Duck fans that are watching this, but gosh, this game, being a Duck fan, it makes me think of the year 2019-2020 when the Ducks were undefeated going into the second to last week of the season. We go into Arizona State. We come out with our first loss thanks to Jaden Daniels. We were trending to be the number one team. We were. That's where we were. We were undefeated. Oregon was looking great.
Y'all knew about Jaden Daniels before the rest of the country did.
We learned the hard way that game. I'll tell you that. He ran all over our butts. But this Wisconsin team does not have a quarterback like Jaden Daniels, but it just has shades of that year, and it worries me because of that.
Yeah, I'm just gonna make this short and quick to the point. Matthew, you got nothing to worry about, okay? Because Locke sucks ass. As a quarterback, I'm sure he's probably a fine human being, okay?
Yeah.
But as a quarterback, he sucks ass.
Yeah, like I said, it should not be a close game, but it's upset season no matter where you're at. I just hope this ain't it.
Yeah, and it won't be it. I mean, what a difference in directions these two programs have had since the last time they met in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
It's just completely divergent. And Wisconsin, they're still trying to figure out who they are with Phil Longo and all that, that whole offensive. How do we get players that traditionally would not go to Wisconsin to come to Wisconsin to play in this type of offense? That I always said that was a terrible hire because it doesn't fit the culture of what Wisconsin is. Now, granted, Wisconsin is a hell of an atmosphere of a stadium. The jump around thing, I love it. Every chance I get to watch that go down, I love it. But what's on the field, I'm not loving that. It's not Wisconsin football. It's trying to figure out how to modernize a program that doesn't need to be modernized. Very much like Nebraska did all those years ago, and they're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And Luke Fickell, I think, should have stayed at Cincinnati because I think there was going to be more opportunities open up for him. But he felt like he had to make that decision. So here he is at Wisconsin. David?
Well, speaking of Nebraska, Ed, it's funny that you bring that up because as Matthew was talking, I was thinking about what made Wisconsin great before was that they always had these great running backs like Melvin Gordon and like Jonathan Taylor, and there's one, maybe two other guys, that I can't think of right
Ron Dane.
now. Yep, him as well. And as I was thinking of great running backs in Wisconsin, I started thinking about great running backs in college. And y'all remember Samaje Perine when he went off for like 400 yards, 400 on the ground
Yeah.
this season?
Yeah, it was crazy. It honestly, it was one of the best offensive performances and not expected at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens, and you never know. That's what I'm talking about with upset seasons or just coming out of the blue. Sometimes things like that happen. But I mean, I think we're all three in agreement here. I know what I said about it gives me shades of that year. I'm still going to take Oregon here, and they're 13 and a half point favorites. I think they may beat them by more than that. So I think all three of us got Oregon winning this game. You guys agree?
Agreed.
Uh,
Yep.
yeah, say I. But
All right.
this next game is the game that everyone's gonna be talking about because it has so much implications from the SEC possible championship game to the college football playoff. You got the Tennessee Volunteers and the Georgia Bulldogs. This is a night game, ABC prime time. This is all you could ask for is right here in this game. One of the big storylines going into this is would Nico be playing? I've seen that Nico's playing. Georgia, ETN is out. And David, of all people, knows how big of a blow that could be because him being on the Gators last year. So Georgia without their starting running back, but they still got some studs back there. But those are big stories there because you want to be fully healthy in a game like this, especially with the implications that are happening in here. And Ed, I got to ask you, being the newest edition of the SEC, the SEC is just drunk right now. I mean, there is a lot that could happen if, let's say, Georgia wins this game. I mean, how do you see all this playing out?
Do you want the short version or the long version?
You give me any version you want.
Okay. Well, I laid out, and I think David saw this, a nightmare scenario for the SEC uh, toward the end of the season where you could have up to 6 SEC teams with 3 losses. That would be an absolute nightmare for this league that claims itself to be the best league in college football, and there's no doubt about it. Well, if you don't have the top teams like by record or standing, then it's hard to say that you are. I agree that it is the best. It's huge. It is the best league in college football, but it is cannibalizing itself more this year than I've seen in probably 2 decades. Uh, Thinking back to that 2007 season. Uh,
Crazy.
so there there's a lot that can happen between now and the end of this month that would just make this drunk tank stupor just the seventh to ninth level of drunkenness by the time that this month is over. And it all starts with Georgia beating Tennessee. Now, with ETN being out, that means Tennessee's defense, which has been highly overlooked, not underrated, but overlooked as being a reason why they are 8-1 right now, that they are going to force Carson Beck to beat them. And Carson Beck has proven this year that he cannot do it without those aliens that he had last year that could just outmuscle and outwork everybody else on the field. So I, I'm going to take Tennessee in this game. I know it's about a 9 to 10 point spread, but I don't see how Georgia is going to get everything out of it that they need to without ETN being in the backfield.
So when I compare these two teams, especially when I compare them on offense, they're very, very similar on offense in the fact that both teams have not been that great offensively. But I feel like their struggles on offense differ. Whereas to me, it feels like Georgia's struggles on offense are mainly due to them just not being as talented that they as they have been before. Whereas Tennessee's struggles on offense more so feels like they're just scared to utilize the talent that they have. I think I saw that Nico has an 11 to 4 touchdown interception ratio, which isn't terrible, but nowhere near what you expect a guy of his caliber to be. And to me, and it's why I want to pick Tennessee to win, because Tennessee is basically that high schooler who, for the first couple of years, is just a complete slacker, skips school, doesn't turn in his assignments, right? And then his junior year comes, and of course, as we all recall, junior year is the year that we all take seriously because it's when we take all those big tests, right? And then you kind of realize that, oh, I had more in me than I had realized, and that's Tennessee for me. That's why I am tempted to pick Tennessee to beat Georgia, man. But I just and until I actually see it happen, I got to go with Georgia. Okay. Likewise with Ole Miss, I picked Georgia over Ole Miss because Ole Miss did not earn my trust. They did not earn my respect until they did go out and earn it. Okay. It's going to be the same thing with Tennessee. Tennessee is gonna have to show me that they're capable of beating Georgia, and until I see it, I'm gonna have to take Georgia.
Well, and that's what makes me so curious here because Georgia is an 8.5 point favorite or so right now. Is this because of David's logic that until Tennessee shows otherwise, Georgia's playing home, they're going to be the favorite because
You know what's funny about that,
yeah,
Matthew? Georgia has actually been more dominant against Tennessee on the road than at home in
yeah,
Athens.
yeah. So that's why it's just crazy to me that Georgia is this favorite over Tennessee right now because Georgia hasn't really shown most. My only logic here is because they're another orange team with a T in them. So that's all I can really come up with. But Georgia does not look like this Georgia team that we're used to seeing, and that's why it makes me curious as why they have them as the favorite. Can Georgia win this game? Absolutely, I think Georgia can. But will they win this game? I'm a little hesitant to really say that. I think that Tennessee, Dylan Sampson and Nico could really run the ball down the throat of Georgia. And I think Tennessee's defense can really make Georgia have to scram around, and that's when they make mistakes. So all odds, all fingers point towards Tennessee's direction here. So I'd have to go with Tennessee here. It's going to be one good game.
Just as a clarifying point for what I was talking about earlier, I had mentioned that there's a possibility of seeing so many SEC teams with 3 losses by the end of this year, and that's with Georgia winning this game.
Yeah,
Tennessee could lose to Vanderbilt at the end of this season in their state rivalry, and then Georgia could lose to Georgia Tech after what we saw with Georgia Tech against Miami. I mean, there's 2 right there.
Mm-hmm.
Hey,
So,
by the way, is Vanderbilt ranked?
not currently.
Not anymore, no.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
They got ranked and then lost to Texas. Got ranked again and lost to Mississippi State.
Because I thought I may have had to retract what I said earlier about Texas not beating any ranked teams, but evidently they have not.
Well, there's 2 ways of looking at it though. Ranked at the time that they played, or ranked at the end of the season.
And that is really interesting. Like, that's a debate we can have for another time. But I have always been, fascinated by that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think this game could still go anyway because since the SEC is drunk right now, I could see Georgia winning this game and just creating utter chaos. So, but I'm still gonna go with Tennessee here. But like I said, it's gonna be a great game. Anything could happen. On to the next and final game. And this game, to me, I think could be an upset. I'm just going to start out with that here. And that is Kansas against BYU. BYU, although undefeated, they haven't looked the most impressive. But nonetheless, they have won every game. That a win is a win. I will always say that. Kansas, on the other hand, has been an utter disappointment. 3-6. If you saw this Kansas Jayhawks team the beginning of last year, you wouldn't have thought that they'd be, trending in this direction. You would have thought they'd be trending in the opposite direction. Here they are at 3-6, and they have really nothing but spoiler chances to really do at this point. And this could very well be one of them because beating BYU, yes, gives them their first loss, But believe it or not, things are tight in the Big 12 right now, as you have Colorado and Ed, SMU, right?
Smoo.
Wait, that's in the ACC. This is
That's
not.
ACC. Sorry. AC. I totally got it mixed up. My bad. But you do have Colorado there. Iowa State
Kansas
still.
State, Iowa State.
Yeah. So things are getting a little tight right now in the Big 12, and that could create more of an issue for BYU picking up a loss here. I really do feel like Kansas is going to pull off upset here. I don't know exactly why, but it just screams to me upset. It really does. David?
I can tell you why, Matthew. I agree with you that I think Kansas is going to pull off the upset. And you say you don't know why? Well, I'll tell you exactly why. Because one, we know what Jalen Daniels is capable of. Okay, we've seen him make some incredible plays, both with his arms and his feet. And second of all, BYU may be undefeated, but they've been flirting with disaster. They probably should have lost that game to Utah. Whether that holding call was correct or not, that's a topic for another time. But the point is that is a game that BYU came extremely close to losing. All right, that's the most objective way that I can put it. So I agree with you, and those are the reasons why I think BYU could fall.
Yeah, at home, which would not be fun.
Ed,
So everybody talks about Jalen Daniels, and that is warranted, right? What we are forgetting is Devin Neal is the all-time leading rusher for a Kansas program in yards and touchdowns. He's 59 yards away from reaching 4,000 for his career at Kansas. That is monumental.
Mm-hmm.
And he has been just as important to this program, making this turnaround from being the laughingstock of college football to what they are now, which it's a team that nobody can quite get a grasp on, but nobody really wants to play.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout this season, Kansas has lost a lot of those, has been a hard luck loser in a lot of games. So for them to come off of a big win this last week and go into this game against BYU, this is going to be a lot tighter than what is being heralded as a 60-40 split in favor of BYU right now. But I'm still going to take the Cougars because just like the Kansas City Chiefs,
Yeah.
they're winning until they don't. And maybe it has to do with figuring out who's officiating this game or who isn't. But Retzlaff, Martin, and Roberts, they have done a good enough job, and they've done good at all three levels: offense, defense, special teams. And in the Big 12 this year, that's good enough. So I'm still taking BYU to win, even though my heart is telling me that Kansas is going to put up a hell of a fight in Provo.
Yeah, I mean, that was a great analogy with BYU and the Chiefs because they are winning. They're figuring out how to win at late. Controversial, maybe, yes. And but they're still pulling off the wins. But I see this being very close, just like the Utah game at the end. It could go in one each other way. But yeah, Jalen Daniels and Kansas, I just smell upset here. But we will find out. We will definitely find out here, and we would love to hear from you guys as far as your predictions go too. So if you could hit us up in the comments section on who you have winning this game, we'd appreciate that. That's about all we have today, folks. We appreciate you once again tuning in. If you get that like, subscribe button, share these videos, we greatly appreciate that. Thanks for tuning in today, and don't forget to tune in on Monday for our recap of college football, and we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of NHL in there too. So be there or be square. But until next time, guys, we are round in third, and we are headed for home.